and my experience with grant programs here. A good reminder, Megan, thank you. This will be recorded and put on the web page. And Derek, if you wouldn't mind putting the web page address up, I do have it as a share screen, but we'll reference that on occasion this evening as well. So as far as the materials go, I have a slew of materials that I'd like to bring up and share. A little bit clunky for me, frankly, so bear with me. And if you have some questions or can't see something, I can make it bigger or we can discuss it. I think it's a small enough group probably that, you can raise your hand and work through Derek or Megan that'll be tracking. I'm not seeing everything on the screen at all times as I'm moving from screen to screen. So please, if you type your questions in or raise your hand, that would be really handy for me. And then tonight, what I'd really like to do is look over the request for proposal sheet that can be found here on the webpage that many of you have already seen. The grant instructions, which describe by box what should be in the grant application, as well as some detail on how the work group will receive these and score these and rank them out. An application flow chart, which I want to describe a little bit about maybe building a landscape scale project. And then we'll talk a little bit about map requirements and what that may look like. And I'll save that a little bit to the end because that gets a little bit more complicated. And I'll do a lot of sharing of screens with some maps as well. And then we'll review the timeline just to make sure everybody's on board with exactly when everything needs to be due, and make sure that our contact information is out there if you have more questions. This is my life right now. I'm happy to share some time with any one of you or any one of your groups at any time and answer questions. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm here for. And then of course, we'll save some time for Q&A. So I think that'll work out just fine. I'm noticing a couple of comments here. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Derek. Okay, so if you check your chat, there's going to be some web pages over there. And one, I'd like to just take a quick look at this screen share that I have. And this is our ODF web page that is specific to the Landscape Resiliency Program. And you may find a little bit of nomenclature change in here in that when we were calling it and the work group and some of the work we've done, we referenced the Forest Land and Rangeland Restoration and Resiliency Investment Program Work Group. And now I'm going to get a little bit of water. So I think you can recognize that as we decided to roll this out for media consumption, and when we talk to some of our legislative partners and governor's office and some of our other partners, the Landscape Resiliency Program rolls off the tongue a lot easier. And that really encompasses forest land and rangeland restoration and resiliency. And we are obviously making major investments here statewide, and that's the program that we're focused on here. So I might get a little mixed up and call it the FRIP occasionally, but it's the Landscape Resiliency Program. And I think all of our materials have reflected that change. So very quickly, if you haven't seen this already, the request for proposals is a link here that goes directly to that. The grant application is also a link, and the grant application instructions. You'll notice up here in the right upper corner, there's some strategic landscape maps, as well as information session videos and timelines. And then just real quick, the meetings that we've been having as a work group with our technical advisors to help develop this program are all found here. And this is where we will also have tonight's workshop recording in this section right here too for everyone. So if there's anything particular about that, happy to address it, but that is our webpage. And what I'd like to jump into now is the request for proposal that went out to many of our partners. And there it is. I see your head nodding. Megan, thank you, because I'll be tracking that to make sure that my screen is sharing correctly. So this went out through various avenues. Derek put together a fabulous piece that went out as a media release. We worked with our local districts to get this out. I apologize if some have not seen this. but we're really trying to get this out through all of our kind of traditional partners, as well as new folks that we've begun working with here more recently too. And we can certainly look at this a little bit closer. I'd like to tease out just a couple of items here that really are important for the program. It is across all ownerships, so there's no no problems with building a landscape scale project that might exclude someone, for instance, or some ownership. Projects must be completed by June 30th. So this funding is biennium funding, and it's due June 30th of 23. We'll get into some of these details here shortly as well. I really do want to get to the actual application and spend some real quality time there with that document. If you have any questions, this is an email that goes directly to myself and Megan, and we can answer that. The due date is January 7th for these applications and materials. And we'll mention that at the end too, to make sure that everyone remembers. So within the application, you'll notice a few items of eligibility and criteria that we've built around this process. And you'll notice that some of this may come off as being a little bit complicated, but really, I think I've teased it out quite well, hopefully in the application to explain what we're really looking for and the intent of the program. So the focus is really going to be on implementation, and that's very simply removing fuels and implementing fire projects on the ground, including all sorts of other tools that we can use, chainsaws and mastication and pile burning and all those things that go into it. We'll look at that in the application, but we really wanted to try to get to the point of implementation, recognizing though that evaluation and monitoring are necessary to make sure that we can tell a successful story at the end of the process, hopefully to present that to the legislature and continue this program moving forward. And then recognizing as well that there's a planning portion that really needs to be in place that can be happening right now that does take advantage of perhaps shelf-ready projects, but also tinkering around the edges to make sure that the landscape scale project is ready to be implemented as soon as we can get agreements in place. There's a little bit of description here. Again, I really want to focus on the application. I think that's what we're focused on tonight, so I'll move through this a little bit quicker. There is a match requirement, although it's strongly encouraged, so I shouldn't say requirement, but we are hoping that folks on that landscape scale, the entire project, can really show that there's some other influence, some other participation that can help the project along. We'll talk about equipment. We're going to look at the competitive grant application.
So Jeff, as you're scrolling through, we're starting to get some questions, and I think some of them will be answered during your presentation as far as match and planning and monitoring. But can you just please give a quick overview of landscape scale projects and what defines the landscape scale?
You bet, and thank you. Let me pause on that for 1 minute and I'll get to it. So again, spend a little bit of time with this. I'm going to get right into that landscape scale project and how we might build that. But there's some real nuggets in here that are really handy to have. And so I would just encourage everyone to take the time to read through. We wanted to have these out on the street, so to speak, for over a week so that folks could absorb some of this information before this evening. And it really is important to read this or give me a call and we can work through it as well. But I'll circle back to that landscape in just a moment. There's a little bit more about planning and evaluation and ineligible projects. So again, the focus is fuels treatments. It's not a small business startup or to create a GIS database system for an organization or something like that. So within reason, we're looking at treating fuels and really focusing on landscape change. And keep in mind, this whole process was born out of the 2020 fire season, the Labor Day fires that really affected the state so much. On that landscape scale. And so keeping that in mind, this was all really developed to focus on those particular areas that that we'll discuss a little bit closer when we get the map out as well. You'll also notice in here, there's some links. Okay, so we'll be looking at a little bit of those. And each one of these are linked to very important information. Scrolling down again, this is stuff we've covered already. A little bit more about how we might integrate projects with other entities that are doing similar work, or how we can marry up projects on a larger scale. And I'll just get to that in just a moment. And then some other particulars on who to get in touch with, timelines, okay, project proposals due, award notifications, and then our contact information here. Again, Alex Romlo is really in charge of the Small Forest Land Grant Program, and he will also have a workshop next week, I believe it is. I know Derek has been tracking that a little bit better than I have, so there'll be an opportunity to discuss that program with him as well. Okay, if I could get to that question, I am going to move this over. Do I get a nod, Megan? All right. Okay, thanks. Okay, so it is a little bit unique in a sense that for years and years, we've all participated, and many of us have participated in federally funded grant programs or small landowner assistance, like a Western States Fire Managers or a bark beetle grant or something like that, or even in the urban and community forestry program, there's planting and park grants and things like that, or water quality grants through OWEB and that kind of thing. Those are all really very specific though, and pretty focused on a smaller landscape. And so the idea with this huge $20 million funding source, and the intent of the legislature really was to focus on large landscape scale projects that broadened the footprint across the landscape with multiple ownerships, kind of blurring the lines, so to speak, of all of those participants out there, those disparate parts, for a more cohesive process in how we can do this. And so I've just put this together. I believe really that there's a lot of ways to do this work. You all may have very creative ways of doing this. This is just an example from my mind on how it may look. And you'll notice as we work through this flow chart, this also assists the 10-person work group to take a look at these in a large landscape with a more focused process, so that the applicant can just send in one application. We can look at them and then move into how we can fund those. And I'll talk about that right now. So again, lots of different ways of doing this, but in my mind, here is, and if you're seeing my cursor as well, I can make this bigger. So let's say that State Forest has a project on the books, and it could be Gilchrist State Forest or Sunpass State Forest or whomever it may be, to the tune of about $300,000, an accomplishment that they feel comfortable with making for the rest of the biennium. There's a nearby private subdivision with an active homeowners association that knows that they can treat common lands, ingress, egress, working around fuel breaks around boundaries and things like that. So they have a little bit of a plan in place. The Forest Service on the books already has provided for NEPA. So these projects are ready to go. There's $800,000 of project there. Perhaps ODF&W has a portion of a project that they've been working on to remove fuels and to protect sensitive wildlife habitat, that kind of thing. And then maybe there's a private ranch that's involved that has a large holding along the edges of the state forest and the valley where the subdivision is. And they wanted to remove juniper, invasive species, things like that. And then maybe there's some private timber that wanted to participate along the boundaries. They wanted to protect ODF&W, threatened endangered species, so on and so forth. So if we can think about all those individual projects and begin to build them up into a larger landscape scale, go through the application process, understanding very clearly that there is a different scope of work for each landowner. There is a different budget for each landowner. There may be different values for each landowner. There may be different long-term goals and objectives. That's okay. To roll that up in the application and being somewhat sponsored is what we'd like to say, so that we as ODF and really the mechanics behind how we manage funding, we'll need to work with one entity to receive the proposal and review it very easily, and then look at that as a larger project. And so that's what we're asking for. So there's FRIP. Remember, we're calling it the landscape scale or landscape restoration program now. But so all this adds up. There's $2.75 million worth of project here. It covers thousands of acres. That's a much larger landscape. That comes to the work group where we can review, score, rank, and recommend projects to be funded. And then we have an opportunity, once we get to that funding level in mid to late January, now ODF, my shop, a very small team that really has to manage these across the landscape, has an opportunity to tease out the individual budgets and the individual scopes of work with each one of these entities to make sure that all of those expenses can be reimbursed in a timely manner. And so it does a couple of things. This allows us, again, to look at the whole landscape in one project, which is very handy as far as ranking and assessing the project. But it also doesn't put all the pressure on one entity to pay for all costs and be responsible for reimbursement of all expenses, where we can do that individually through agreements with each one of these entities to really provide a little bit more of a hands-on approach with each one of these and work through that process together. That's the idea of what we're talking about, is rolling these up. Okay.
So Jeff, while you have a pause there, I just want to get this question, I think is part of a, I think you may have addressed it earlier, but there's a question if there's flexibility in how much of the 30% non-implementation dollars can be spent on planning versus monitoring. I think what I saw from the application there was that 30% can be spent on those combination of things. So there's not a limit within that 30% of planning versus monitoring, or is there?
No, and I will get to that shortly, if I may. I am looking for, why am I not able? Thanks for being patient with me. Okay, I want to share. You're still seeing the application flow chart. That's what I want to get rid of. No, you're not.
Nope,
Nope,
we're on the
we're-
application.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay, so here is the application, and I have mocked one up here. There's a few jokes in here if you can spot them. It's a little silly, but I had some fun with it. This was built out of various successful projects that I've seen over the years, so you might even recognize some of these. But really, it's not perfect. It's up to you to put together a perfect application. As I cut and paste and added some things up in here and put in a little bit of my narrative to try to clarify, you'll notice that some of it doesn't quite add up. That's okay. We'll be able to talk at a little bit higher level. And if you have some real questions about those specific things, like a 30-70 rule and how we're looking at that, we'll certainly get to that. At the same time, I do want to have on my radar, at least over here, the instruction page. So I know that we have the application up, but I'm also looking at and referencing the instruction page as well. And so if you have that, that would be great. I think in the upper section of the instructions, that's just a repeat of what you saw in the call for request for proposals. The one unique portion of this, though, is that there's a little bit of an idea of how the work group will score these and what actually goes into the boxes. And so what I need to do here, I guess, without split screen and that, is just reference back and forth. That's the way I'd sit down and fill this out. And I'll try to do that for you as best I can and paint that picture. Then we get into application guidelines and look at the individual boxes and what the expectation is there as well. So with that being said, let's look at some of these in more focus, and I think that we'll answer some questions. So proposal applicant, obviously the conservation district, that's one entity that we can deal with just to call and just work through some questions or issues that might arise, or if we don't see a complete application for some strange reason, that's just someone we can get a hold of, and that's going to be really important as you roll this up, even though there's other parts of the project, obviously. Okay, box 2 does get a little tricky. And I'm going to do this in two ways. We're going to discuss a little bit about box 2 now, but then I also want to circle back when I have a little bit more time and can get rid of some of the clutter in front of me to actually talk about mapping and what that means. So if we can hold off on that to some degree. But box 2, does the application clearly show how the project relates to the lands in the 4 highest expected net value change in the Northwest Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessment? Now, there's a little bit of there's a reason behind that particular box, this particular box. The language in 762 specifically called out for this map to be utilized in building the criteria. I've heard a lot of comments and feel various ways about all the maps that can be produced out there with a full understanding. And I think the work group really understands and really discussed this in great detail. What's the best map? How can this be done to really show the need and the risk assessment out there on the landscape? And I'm not sure that anyone at any time could come up with the perfect map of what that's going to look like. And so we'd like to do a couple of things within this box. It's an opportunity for those like me that maybe don't have a lot of wherewithal to build a map, to put in a description of a Latin long that shows the general location of the project. But you'll notice as well that the counties are listed here, as well as community names. And so it does give the review committee an opportunity to see on the landscape where this project is, with a descriptor here that describes adjacent lands on the Forest Service property and along, a riparian area.
Do you want to scroll down a little bit, Jeff? We don't see all of box 2.
Does that help? And then there's also an opportunity to put in boundaries, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll pull up some examples. But I like the description. I think that's a really nice way for us to be able to take a look at these projects and have a narrative with it that describes really the area. And again, this language is not necessarily, and please, I'll say this a couple of times, this language, I made this stuff up, cut and paste, and just tried to give an example.
You're not moving the document, Jeff, if you're trying to scroll it down. We're not seeing it move at all.
Oh. Interesting. But you are looking at the application.
Yeah, the furthest thing down that we're seeing is the counties of Staghorn, Forked Horn, and Cooper.
Any movement there?
Nope, I would just stop share and try again.
Okay. Certainly will. Sorry about that. It's moving for me.
There we go.
Is it moving?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Whew. Boy, get hot under the collar when things like that happen. Okay. So you'll notice the descriptor in here, which is a good opportunity to describe what the communities look like and what adjacent lands may be treated. Okay, and we'll circle back to some specific on mapping too. But let's get into some of the applicant budget here as well. So box 3 and 4 is scoring really how well the applicant can cipher out various funds that would go to individual entities, but be rolled up in a larger landscape scale project. And that is a bit of a trick. I recognize that. So box 3 and 4 gives us that opportunity. And I have some notes here to help me through as well. Okay. So first off, you'll notice that I have 400, the total project cost, thinking of that landscape scale flow chart, we're hitting a $2.75 million project. And that's all those parts. So all I did to create this was look at each one of those, and I made up a budget for the $300,000 in state forests that would go towards building that project. Well, then I have a budget from the Forest Service that was $800,000, and they teased out their personnel, fringe travel, equipment costs, and that kind of thing. So really, when I see this happening within this work group that you're creating for your landscape scale project, it's likely that whoever is putting this together can receive a budget from 5 or 6 different entities. Keeping in mind, though, that these particular line items need to be in that budget. And it is just a budget, so it's a guess of what can be done. But then they're all rolled up into one applicant budget that shows a $2.75 million project. And so within personnel and labor, there's 2 or 3 different entities that are budgeting for personnel. There's 2 or 3 different entities that are budgeting for supplies. You'll notice contractual is very large because there's a large component of contracting out work with private companies, work crews, other items like that. And as we get into the budget narrative that explains a little bit more, I'm really going to try to nail that down. And I will certainly pause because this can be somewhat complicated for some questions. So the grant funds request obviously is here in this first column. We'd like to see some attempt at some match. Again, it's strongly encouraged. There's some match that's available. So if the applicant, scrolling back up here, is the, Brushy Pass Conservation District that is really putting this all together and leading the charge for everyone, the applicant is able to provide $14,000 in over an 18-month period in some match. They can count personnel time, some other travel time, whatever the case may be. Personnel time specifically. And then partner organizations can count $76,000 in match. Let me describe a little bit of that. So if Forest Service employees are out on a project, they're working all day long and touching 3 or 4 different projects in the area, but they are really looking at it at a landscape scale, that might be a great way to match with some federal funds. So there's no match requirements as far as what funding you may or may not use, except for general fund. This is general fund. So utilizing federal projects is a great way to provide some match. Travel, here's an example from ODF that we use all the time. We have stewardship foresters say that go out on the landscape and again, touch 4 or 5 different portions of the project. Maybe they're visiting a private ranch. Maybe they're visiting some state forest land in the afternoon and then get back to the office and spend a couple more hours writing up a narrative. That can be personnel time or travel time as they move around the district, and that can be provided as match. It's strongly encouraged. I tried to hit 25% with my numbers here and actually did, but again, not totally necessary. Just showing some participation on a larger level than just receiving some funds. Okay, that's probably a good point to stop. I know I want to get to that 70-30 break.
And we do have another question in the Q&A related to match, if you wanted me to read that to you.
I just opened it up. Thank you. I believe. So is there flexibility on the 30 non-implementation? I'm seeing that. Ken, thank you. And then Dallas, how far back are match funds eligible? Are any funds spent in this biennium towards a project eligible as match? Okay, let's tackle Ken first. Is there flexibility on how much of the 30% non-implementation money can be spent on planning versus monitoring? Yes, absolutely can. And what you'll notice, and again, a lot of open pages right here, but you'll notice in the request for proposals that we're looking at this as a greater than or equal to 70% implementation, a less than 10% evaluation and monitoring, and a less than 20% of planning. Really recognizing that these expenditures can move around. There's a lot of gray area. So when you're out there and a crew is implementing, and that's considered an implementation, they're running a chipper, they're cutting small trees and shrubs and chipping piles. Do they stop and plan for an hour before they start work? You bet. That's part of planning. So it's going to be impossible, and not what we want to do, is to parse these out hour by hour in these particular line items. But we would expect, and the legislature expects, that the lion's share of this funding goes to focusing fire mitigation projects on the ground. And so is there flexibility? You bet. But we would also not like to see the entire project be just cutting trees without any planning or monitoring or evaluation towards the end as well, because there are some other requirements like providing numbers, reporting items, so that we can roll those up and put together a report for the legislature this coming fall, or excuse me, fall of 22. So there's got to be a nice balance of what the project looks like. And I'll get into some numbers here shortly that I hope can help. And Dallas, how far back are match funds eligible? Are any funds spent in this biennium towards the project eligible as match? Yes, and this is something that we haven't really talked about in Dallas. Thank you. Dallas is on the work group as well. Something we really haven't talked about, but I'm working with our folks here as well about providing for pre-award costs. And we were able to do this with our e-board funding of about 8-9 months ago, or a year ago now, to provide for pre-award costs. This is biennium funding, and so it has been available since the end of July, I believe. I'll have to double check on that. So let's stand by on that one, but there's going to be an opportunity to show pre-award costs that will be able to move match, that you can show match prior to the signatures of the agreement. So I think I answered that, yes, but I want to get details lined out a little bit better than the way I just described that. Okay, so in the budget narrative, there's a little bit of some nuance here. And so let's take a look. A really good opportunity to describe what these numbers are, though. So obviously, South Brushy Mountains, fuel reduction treatment, oversight of the project will be provided by the Conservation District. So in personnel of $400,000 and fringe of $136,000, those costs are for ODF and Forest Service staff to provide technical assistance and outreach to landowners. So there's some forester staff time built into it, but it also is funding an interagency fuel crew to be utilized for labor on federal and state lands. We do this quite often as well. So the personnel and labor is not only technical support and oversight and some planning available in there, but it also can reflect actual labor on the ground for agency personnel, for instance. Again, this can be done in a lot of different ways. This is just from my head on what we typically see, including fuel reduction projects. And when I put RX in there, that's prescribed fire. But to the point made earlier about teasing out a 20% or a 10% of additional costs, we would like to see some reference to that. A portion of personnel and fringe to the tune of about $20,000 will be utilized for planning the project, which includes stakeholder meetings and mapping. So remember, this is rolled up from the entire, 5 or 6 different individual projects on the landscape. And so $20,000 is specifically identified in here. There's other opportunities for planning, and we'll talk a little bit about indirect expenses here in a moment. But $20,000 is very obviously less than 20% of total project cost. And then while I'm at this, I'd also like to tease out the contractual expense here, and I'll describe the difference of what we're looking for. So the contractual expense includes $2.1 million for contract crews and fuel reduction projects, but a portion of that, $35,000 of contractual expense, will be used for conservation district oversight, monitoring, and evaluation. So in this paragraph, there's 2 portions that are teased out specifically, $20,000 and $35,000. Of planning and evaluation and monitoring. And so that really is what's called for in the request for proposal. And that is well below the threshold of 20% for planning and 10% for evaluation and monitoring. But the work group, the folks that are reviewing this, are able to recognize that a portion of it is going for that overhead, so to speak, to make sure that the job is done, it's planned, and it's evaluated, and there's a reporting component to it. But that the lion's share of expense, again, over $3 million, including match, is available for on-the-ground work, implementation work. Now, indirect gets a little bit tricky there, because indirect really is all of those items that are rolled up that we can't tease out as a direct expense. And so when we get invoices in from all of our partners there, we'll have 100 acres treated. We'll have prescribed fire line prep for 16 days, whatever the case may be. So there's actual deliverables on the invoice, but then there's a portion in there that can go to indirect expense, and indirect is just simply things that aren't tracked as direct expense, paper, some administrative time to collect information and document that. Maybe someone in the conservation district has touched on 5 or 6 different projects in one day, and there's no way that person could tease out a direct expense for each portion of time they spent in one day. So maybe that particular day is captured in indirect expense. And that's for planning, budgeting, tracking, invoicing, and reporting. So I don't want to use this word, but it kind of works. It's a little bit slush so that folks can cover expenses without having to tease out direct expense that otherwise might be pulled out in acres treated, time for crews spent on the ground, actual travel time to and from events, meeting with landowners, full days of travel to monitor projects, those types of things, or hard supply costs, prevention and supply materials, or an actual mailing that went out that cost, $1,200. So I think I'll stop there. That's a lot, and I don't know if I articulated that completely well. Any other questions or thoughts about that budget narrative?
So Jeff, we don't have any current open questions. I will just encourage all of those with us on the webinar today to either use the Q&A, type your question in the chat, or use the raise hand feature, and we'll call on you and activate your mic so that you can voice your question. We're happy to take those anyway, but in the webinar, we just need to make sure that you can step forward in some way in the Q&A or otherwise. So we do have a question now, Jeff.
Okay, I can pop on there.
Can you see that?
Oh, yes, I do. Okay, Dallas, thank you. I just want to clarify that you mean that the indirect costs don't count towards planning or evaluation. Yes, absolutely. It's so difficult to tease out indirect costs that we really can't, we won't be able to track that. And please, if you have questions or they're in the Q&A section, or you have them and you're emailing and things like that, I'll be available. We can really get into this in the next few days. I'm happy to respond at any time to folks that might want a little bit more detail. And again, I pulled this just off the top of my head from projects that I've seen successful in years past. There's probably a number of ways to do this creatively that you may already be thinking about. Okay, that's a couple of big boxes right there. Those numbers are sometimes hard to put together. I think we'll move a little bit quicker here just because it's a little bit easier from my perspective. I'm not a great numbers person. Anyway, so box number 5 is describing the project. And really that's describing the challenges and issues that articulate why the project is important. So it's not necessarily that, we're going to be cutting all trees under 6 inches in diameters and removing manzanita. That's not necessarily a prescription box. We get into that in box 7, actually. Excuse me. This is describing the area and what is the real need here. Why fund this landscape scale project? And so you'll notice some of the language in here that I'll tease out. So it references the communities. So it gives us an idea that, there are folks there. There's private land that encompasses 32,000 acres. Okay. We're starting to paint a picture of what this looks like. There's 2,850 different landowners. That in and of itself can create problems or issues that need to be addressed. One major landowner owns 1,000 acres, and the Forest Service planning area through the NEPA process is 3,000 acres. That's their footprint. Years of negligence has left the forest with high stocking levels. What kind of fuels are we talking about? Ponderosa and lodgepole. Young trees unchecked by management, or a lack of fire within the area that has not really knocked that understory down. Excessive amounts of bitter brush and manzanita. I see a question. One moment, please. Paired with dense lodgepole and ponderosa. So here's a little bit about insect and disease infestation that provides for an extreme fire hazard. Ladder fuels, overgrown roads, ingress, egress issues, first responders that are unable to get in. Oh, gas pipeline and large electrical transmission lines in the area. So what kind of infrastructure is at risk? This area is prone to dry lightning, risk of human-caused fires. And some agency folks will provide expertise in monitoring and evaluating projects. So it paints a picture of the area, what issues, and then what kind of folks will be involved in tracking along with this. So let's go to this Q&A real quick. Can we submit an actual map with proposed treatment acres and road miles mapped, for example? Absolutely can. And thank you. And I have a couple of examples that I think are really cool that I'll pull up at the end that'll help describe this and finish painting the picture. Thank you. I've seen other language in here like fire frequency, number of recreationists that come and go in the area, high fire danger issues within the area. Maybe there's other infrastructure that has created some issues in the past, like railways, large campgrounds that sometimes have fires that get out of control. So any description of what that may look like to paint the picture for our folks to be able to see that would be really handy. There's a condition class out there that sometimes helps paint that picture. Okay. Box number 6, planning linkages. So a couple of items here. We would like to not just recreate the wheel with this funding. Lots of great work has been done out there for years with smaller Western states and bark beetle projects, typically federally funded, like I described earlier. And then there's an opportunity for us as an agency as well to begin, planning on a larger landscape scale across not only the state, but the region. And so we wanted to reference the community wildfire protection plans that each county typically has. Sometimes they're done a little bit differently than per county. They can be broken into actual subdivisions and things, which we'll look at. And then the Forest Action Plan is a document that has been around for a number of years that we, ODF, have built out in cooperation with our federal partners, and really takes a lot of the planning on a large scale. The issues, it shows issues from a larger landscape scale, which is really nice when we're trying to develop individual projects that reach up and out to that larger landscape scale. And that's really what we're trying to do. So some language in here, and I'm going to show some links to some CWPPs as well. But it defines the National Association of State Foresters and ODF, what these assessments really look like on that large scale. And that's risk hazard values, structural vulnerability, protection capability. So referencing high risk of the likelihood of fire occurring due to recreationists and summer weather patterns, high hazard dealing with dead dying trees from beetle infestation, and then mitigating these roads and access issues and major utilities. So again, it's a reference point for a smaller project, but on a bigger scale. So, if I may, I had some questions a little while ago, a few days back, on where we may find these. And so, I need to get back into share screen. I don't know if I did that right. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, folks. I'm trying to get over to my other document here. No. This will give everybody a time to put that, get the microwave going for dinner. Grant instructions, that's what I'm looking for. Is that not coming up? I'm sorry. Okay, are you seeing the instructions? Okay. All right. So within this document is a link to, let's just try CWPP first off.
Are you scrolling it around? We don't see you scrolling.
No. Shoot. Okay. I'll try it one more time and then just skip it if it becomes a problem.
We do have a question in the Q&A that is a pretty easy answer. Just a clarification that all land ownerships includes tribal trust lands.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Well, shoot. I've got a bunch of things up. Anyway, you'll notice, I'm not sure if you will or not. I'm looking in the grant instructions, and in box 6, there's a link to the Forest Action Plan and the local CWPP.
We're not seeing the screen if you're sharing it.
That's okay. I'm not going to waste people's time for my issues. And I'll continue to tinker with that as the night goes along and can maybe pull that up. But back to the application. Okay. Are we seeing the application again?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, and thanks for your patience. Okay, so in box 6, again, you'll see in the instructions, the Forest Action Plan, CWPP. I'll tinker with that and then pull up a CWPP, and we can talk a little bit about that. But you'll notice in those, in the language there, in individual CWPPs, say for each county, some particulars on exactly what high values are available, what risk ratings different communities might have. And so it's a really great way to reference some of the work that's already been done and describe it in this box. Okay, proposed activities. That's really where the rubber meets the road. And I will let you in on a little secret here too, is that when we pull these out and begin to not negotiate, but begin to kind of wordsmith and create agreements with different entities, really the starting point of that, a lot of that is legalese, and it's, that's a document that we use as a template that needs to be in there. But when we tease out the scope of work, it's really these proposed activities. That's where the rubber meets the road of what's going to be done and what accomplishments are identified. And then the budget, of course, we tease that out too. So it's really important to take a look and try to get the budget lined out as best you can, and box number 7, proposed activities. And you'll notice in these, and I am moving up and down, Megan, are you seeing that? Oh my goodness. Okay, let's try it one more time.
While you're resharing that, we do have a CWPP question in the Q&A if you wanted me to read it.
Okay, sure, go ahead.
What if your county does not have an up-to-date CWPP or one that does not include the project area?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if you're behind, if a county is behind on an update, I think some of the language in the original might be just fine. Gives an idea of what some of the risks and values were at that time. Maybe it's 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 years old. That's understood. But I would also say that if there's doesn't really define the project area that you're interested in, it would be perfectly acceptable to mention that and really use that to your advantage. And the CWPP has not been updated for 10 years. And what has happened is we've had an influx of wildland urban interface, homes have been built, other new issues have recently come to our attention that weren't on the landscape 10 years ago when it was created. And that's a point I think that can be made very clearly that would really catch our attention on some of the risk that has developed over the recent years. Okay, I'm moving this. You seeing it move? Yes. Okay, so proposed activities. This is really, again, where the rubber meets the road. So the project will treat a total of 6,000 acres. That's across the landscape, across boundaries. Typically, hand crews, masticators, slash busters will be utilized. That's just a general statement of what it is on the landscape, a 30,000 foot level. Now we get actually into the projects. State forest boundary fuel treatments will accomplish specifically 310 acres. That's out of that 6,000. A reduced fuel buffer, property lines, what's actually going to happen. 100% of ladder fuels will be removed. Pile material will be 10 by 10 that will be burned at a later date or chipped, whatever the case may be. Okay, removing 80% of ladder fuels, which is brush, live and dead. Okay, some of the diameter breast height of limitations of trees that may be removed, 4 inches in diameter only, kind of creating that open understory. Maintenance will be provided every 5 to 10 years through state forest management activities. So a long-term look at how it will be maintained is a great look. And in this one, there's even some priority areas. So what is the first priority for a state forest project? A second priority is treating approximately 62 acres, 5 miles of road. Maybe that's a fuel break that is along the edge of the road. And that describes that. A reduction of fuels on both sides of the road. Ingress, egress, as well as a fuel break. And then moving into another part of the project, the Forest Service fuel treatment activities. 1,000 acres of non-commercial thinning, pruning, mowing, mastication, removing ladder fuels and to lower fire intensity. Trees less than 8 inches DBH for removal, a minimum of 12 to 15 feet tree spacing. So again, really opening that up. This again paints the picture of what it'll look like on the landscape, which will be really very different for a project in Eastern Oregon and a project in Western Oregon. So, you know, this really kind of describes what the project will accomplish and adds acres and prescriptions as well. So here's a private landowner portion of the project. The HOA will be contracted and will focus on areas that benefit multiple homes with a fuel break along the boundaries of the public land, perhaps. The crews will complete, over 1,000 acres of thinning, including 1 mile of fuel break along west boundary of state forest. And I'll stop after this for some questions too. So that private ranch, the Juniper Ranch, will be treating 1,000 acres to treat ponderosa pine and juniper. I didn't put a lot in this. This could use more in preparation for a prescribed fire that may be, scheduled for 2023, something like that. There is one little bit that I'd like to tease out here, though, a component of education or outreach. So at least 3 communities will be targeted for becoming Firewise USA communities. Brochures will be purchased and disseminated in this project by ODF and collaborating entities. Will include Firewise materials, fire-resistant plant guides, noxious weeds, those kinds of things. So that may be really back to the budget, part of that $12,000 of supplies to print and develop some of these materials. So any questions or thoughts about that? I would say that box number 7 is really important because that will be what will be identified in the agreement to develop a prescription and accomplishments that will be reported on. Okay, great. Box number 8, and I'm still scrolling here, and then referencing, of course, my grant instructions. Describe the cross-boundary landscape. And again, this gets to that sense of what we're trying to accomplish. It's a much larger project. The footprint is large. It's in the spirit of shared stewardship across boundaries. I see a question. Will it affect the application if there is a commercial component? Where should that be mentioned in the application? Great point. And that is brought up in the request for proposals. A little bit about any commercial component. And so there's two places that really ought to be brought up. I would say that in the budget narrative, if there's an expectation that some portion of volume, whatever the case may be, a unit would provide for this amount of money. So if it's firewood, or if it's some ranch or private property owner or even Forest Service project is working towards some commercial component, that needs to be brought up in the budget, in that there is a unit that is available or anticipated, and what income that may provide. And then also here in box number 7, thank you as well, that the private landowner projects within the HOA, back here, will be contracted and focus on areas that benefit multiple homes and fuel breaks. There is a component of common land firewood that will be pulled off. The expectation is $2,000 will be raised from that project, which will roll back into additional acres within the HOA subdivision, and additional acres of 13 acres will be treated with additional income from a firewood sale, whatever the case may be. And that is lined out in your request for proposal document. I hope I got that one for you.
I think so, Jeff. I think you made a point there that I just want to clarify to make sure is true, is that does all project revenue need to be reinvested to other portions, or does that just be part of the overall project?
Yes, no, the project revenue needs to be reinvested and needs to show additionality. And that can be in the form of, we've found that we have a project that has created $2,000 worth of product, and we will reinvest that back in with an additional 10 acres. Oh, you couldn't do that. $2,000, 2 acres. Or we've decided to use that to go towards printing brochures for the homeowners association to give to seasonal homeowners that aren't there. Whatever the case may be, there's some creative space there, obviously, but it should be reinvested in the project.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Okay. There's another question there for you to read and answer to, please.
You bet. Megan, we are looking, not Megan Montgomery Jackson. Megan Montgomery. We are looking at a project area that would encompass portions of lands that burned in the South Obenchain fire, but treating remaining high fuel loads in areas that burned with lower severity. Would treating hazardous regrowth be an eligible activity? Absolutely, yes. And that's a great point. Thank you so much. The intent in speaking to the legislature and through the process is that this funding is not for rehab. So it's not to create berms for water quality and erosion issues, or to reseed, in riparian areas. It's not for fire rehab, but there's a lot of opportunity out there on the edges or within these large footprints of these fires to just build that into the larger landscape project, and treating those acres would be great. Thank you. Would reinvested revenue be considered match? Oh, absolutely. That's a great point. It can be match. That's a great point. Yeah, thank you. But it would need to be identified as such on invoices that come in. So cross-boundary opportunities, again, this is just really giving us a picture of all of, hands across the world. A lot of love here in this box. So it kind of teases out that there's good neighbor authority opportunities. There's Joint Chiefs projects that this is building around. There's other partnerships that have been on the landscape for a number of years, and this is building on that good work that's been done across those boundaries. So I see another question I'll get to in just a moment. State Forest is progressively managed over 11,000 acres, so describing things that are already going on. This correlates to an overall increase of wildfire resiliency. Great. Adjacent Forest Service property is treating particular ownership around some structures and defensible space. The BLM is treating this other project will encompass 1,400 acres of fuel reduction. It's a little light there. You know, it might even say something like additional acres for prescribed fire in 2023 or some, actual project. Several of these projects have been jointly developed through local partnerships. A description of those might be great. These are the 6 or 7 entities that are all working together across the landscape, including private lands, and then some of the existing projects like Joint Chiefs that have been funded in years past. So let me go up to the question. To clarify, does box 7 project activities include state and federal projects that are matching projects? Yes, absolutely. Yes. So on the landscape, these are funded projects, but within the footprint, these are the activities that are going on. Good point and good reminder. Thank you very much. So these are projects that are happening that are funded with this general fund, but also including projects that are part of the match as well. And that could even be teased out right here in Forest Service fuel treatments. The expectation is 200 more acres on this side of the fence in this particular high use recreation area will be treated at the same time, and that project is considered match. Great point. Thanks for the reminder there. Okay, I think we're at box 9. Okay, so this is a little bit more, so again, a little bit different. Cross-boundary opportunities are project-based, 11,000 acres of treatment, 1,400 acres of fuel reduction treatment. So what other, projects are going on? And then project collaboration is who are we working with out there and, on the landscape. And that's really calling out. Elk Run Estates HOA has been doing this, collaborating, private landowners providing cash and in-kind match. Forest Service is working on this project. Their participation is this right here, fuel treatments. The Juniper Ranch, the large landowner, is providing labor and in-kind to prepare a fuel break. So it's really describing all of those entities that are collaborating. Box 10, timeline. Okay, this just gives folks an idea of what deliverables we should be looking for and to keep folks on track, because it is biennium funded. And so, come June 30th of 23, these projects will need to be completed. And that is a really quick turnaround. I recognize that. Before I get into this box, there's another question. Can state funds for associated projects like Firewise be used as match for these ODF state dollars? Can state funds for associated projects? General fund cannot match general fund, but many of these Firewise projects, to my knowledge, are federally funded. So that would be something that we'd want to look into, but we need to avoid matching this general fund with other general fund. But these state funds specifically, a lot of times are federal dollars that are awarded to the state that then are disseminated out to various projects. So it would pay to get to follow the money, so to speak, back to perhaps a federal award. So the project timeline, I don't want to, belabor the point here, but obviously we're getting into the winter of 22 as we begin to finalize these and award these projects. Is in January. Hopefully we're trying to go as quickly as we can, knowing that we're on a timeline here, but kind of teasing out really what the deliverables are. By that time, this project expects 2 to 3 meetings with these entities. and project scope and prioritization, conducting mailings, working with private homeowners associations, getting that ramped up so that people know what's going on and you get some buy-in for these. In the summer, really, there's a lot of work that is happening. You know, when the snow's off and there's more access to areas and that kind of thing, mud or snow. Deliverables may include contractual timelines, so that the contract calls for 300 acres to be finished, whatever the case may be. A nice way of putting it, which is perfectly acceptable, is 50% of the project work acres will be completed within 8 months. And so that's a good measure right there. So in the summer of 22, you get out there, are we hitting 50% of our target acres from the award date? If not, perhaps there's ways to manage that. If we are, then good. Let's try to do more, and let's maybe you know, increase what we've budgeted, even as far as accomplishments are concerned. So again, just a moment to pause and think about how this is going to be lined out. You'll notice some language in here in acres treated, monitoring ongoing work, maintaining quality of work. So some field presence should be highlighted here. Measured through, I'm missing a lot of R's and through these days. Measured through monthly site visits. Okay, documenting and reporting on those items. I will bring up, and it's not in here, but there will be a requirement for those awardees. We will have an opportunity in October of 22, about a year from now, to have a mid-project check. And we will be asking for a mid-report. How many acres have been accomplished, how many landowners are involved, what kind of outreach has been provided, that will actually go to the legislature as well. So we need to be prepared for that. But then also with that, there will be an opportunity to go through a modification process. And so if we're finding that, you know, 4 entities are really moving along, 1 entity is struggling a little bit due to unforeseen circumstances, a fire in the community, or access issues that weren't, you know, that weren't expected, things like that. We'll have an opportunity to go through a modification process, and that'll be some documentation working with us here at ODF to kind of develop a new way of doing something or moving some funding around that'll help in the long run getting the project completed. And that would be a good idea to put into this, excuse me, fall of 22 as well. So there's a question. Do the projects used as match have to be completed by June 23 deadline? Yes. Yes. Okay, now box 11, we're really, this is new for us. So really excited to look at this perspective for these projects. We've never really thought about it, but the work group and our technical advisors and the legislature and the governor's office have really provided, excuse me, a lot of influence on, you know, are we getting these funds to the right communities, or, you know, right or wrong is not really the way I should put it, but communities that have not been able to participate in years past for various reasons, or whatever the case may be. And, you know, a lot of us had an aha moment, and it makes a lot of sense. And so we've really kind of laid this out here as a new way, potentially, of a new perspective on how we do business. I added some language in here. Megan helped me with that. And this is just a shot, and I hope that it makes some sense. But we're really looking for some feedback on how these projects can really meaningfully, you know, go to areas that have not been served in the past or really address some concerns across this landscape. And so I'd love to get some feedback from folks on this, but this is just my perspective. This could look in a lot of different ways. But diversity can mean different things to different people. We've defined it broadly to encompass the demographic mix for a collection of people, taking into account elements of human differences and these unique landscapes. So I put in some specifics here from this project that I was thinking about. This project encompasses populations that historically have been and remain underrepresented in grant funding and technical assistance. I work for an agency. I work closely with Forest Service and NRCS and other entities. And you know, oftentimes we miss these opportunities for technical assistance and in the field. So this is I think, a great perspective to take a look and say, are we really putting this where it needs to be? So for an example, these communities, Urbania, Elkra, and Freddie Couples Way, have been impacted by the loss of timber revenue, you know, describing what that economic growth, there's been a problem there. The school district has lost 35% of its staff and almost half of its funding. So there's some particulars that are really kind of teased out to paint a picture of the need. The unemployment rate in these communities is an all-time high. Tribal lands to the north have been hit hard. There's been an issue there. So really looking at that from that perspective through that lens, I think is really important. And then what does this do to help? And I see a question I'll get to. The project is estimated to increase the workforce by 12%. And increase recreational opportunities for additional 3,000 people. The concert and how do we track this? Well, creative space here. The Conservation District will work with county commissioners to monitor economic growth over the next 3 to 5 years and provide an analysis from the impacts. This could look a lot of different ways, but this was just my stab at, you know, how does the project affect people and places, and how do we do this a little bit better? Okay, Ken says the fillable PDF application is very restrictive. No bold, underlining, bullets, hyperlinks. Can this application be submitted using the full range of Adobe formatting? Oh boy, I don't know, Ken. Megan, Derek, do you have a perspective on that?
Yes, but go ahead, Megan.
No, I mean, if you have the Adobe Pro, like you should be able to edit it and do all that, or, you know, do it in Word and copy and paste. And if you're still having issues, we can get you over a better format. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
So for the most part, we use, like most state organizations, use a simple fillable PDF just for accessibility to make it available for everyone to use. If you do, and the state's licensing doesn't allow for reader extension and to extend the full range of services to all users, we don't have the licensing to be able to do that. But if you have a full version of Adobe to be able to do that, then you can use this PDF to do so.
Thank you. Okay, Mary Jo, I see your question and would like to delve into that a little bit here for the next few minutes. Because really, I think that if there's 3 points I could make, probably one would be the budget has a little bit of some nuance. And then the box number 7, the accomplishments and what the treatments will look like is very important. And then the mapping portion of this is also, in my mind, a little bit difficult. So thank you. Let's talk about that now. And I'm going to try to do some stop sharing and some sharing and all that good stuff. So before we get into the actual net value change, I do want to real quick, if I can, pull up some examples of maps that we've gotten with these projects. And that'll be, I think, a real, everyone will recognize what these look like. And then let's take a harder look at the actual net value change. So Okay. Are you seeing the map? Yes. I better be careful. I'm starting to get good at this, or I'm getting lucky. I'm not sure which. So maps that can just encompass these landscapes are going to be rather large scale. And this is just describing that Forest Service property here called Liberty Road is going to be this particular project area. This subdivision over here is going to be this particular project area. And then, where that sits, within the state, some general, 100,000 foot level that we're looking at of, what's the location with some of the adjoining communities and that type of thing. And I believe it was Ken earlier on said, can we provide some project maps that actually show, did that map change? Oh, shoot. Okay. That show priority areas and what some of the prescriptions are. Let me try one of those. Okay.
Are you trying to get to the Bear Wallow?
Yeah, that's one of them. Can you see the Bear Wallow?
Yep.
Okay. You'll notice here that the ODF and W is involved, Eco Trust Forest. I can't see that, but that might be Pinchot Land Trust. We work with them sometimes. ODF and Forest Service. So this is kind of a collaboration across the landscape, identifying Forest Service areas and private lands and that kind of thing from a pretty high level. But right in the legend, and it doesn't show it on this particular one. I've got another, but I won't waste our time. But really, it could easily be priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, and referencing in box 7 that this state lands project is going to be, the first step is to treat this 300 acres. The next step is to treat this 200 acres, and then prepare for a prescribed fire in our 3rd priority. And that can be color coded in here with various hashes and things like that. So that just gives everyone an idea of what's going on and the timeline to do this at a very high level. I hope that makes a point. Okay, now to Mary Jo, thank you. Let me do a little bit more sharing. Okay. Are we seeing the request for proposal? Fantastic. Okay, so one of the links here to the quantitative wildfire risk assessment, this shows the map. And this, again, is what's called for specifically in the language of 762. Now, we're recognizing, I believe, all of us here, that this is not a great map. Dr. Dunn with OSU put a lot of this together, and he did an awesome job with a lot of different products that may be useful. So, nothing on his work. He's done great work, but this describes, a risk that is a little bit different than how we might look at it. So this is the expected net value change. And again, I am no GIS specialist, but what I recall from that conversation that we had is this is really, if there's a fire that moves through the area, what would be the most impacted? And so fire obviously can move through any one of these areas across the entire state. But what are the fuel conditions and likelihood of fire regime that we've seen over the years, ingress, egress. So there's a lot of different components that go into these particular classes. And if you want the details, it's in the quantitative risk assessment, which is easy to find online. But knowing that there's any number of inputs to create this map, this is just describing what that most impacted change would be on the landscape. And so you'll notice up here in the top left-hand corner, class 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so when the legislature put this together in the bill, it was really looking at trying to focus projects to affect a positive change on these 4 particular classes of area. I don't know if I got that all right, but I'm speaking from that QWRA document, one of which I'm not terribly familiar with. So with that being said, I do want to say this is a link to our webpage that shows this. And more recently, it's been brought to our attention, you know, this is not terribly useful when you're trying to drill down and take a look at exactly where your project might be. So Dr. Dunn has given us something else, which I have found to be more useful, that we will put on our webpage tomorrow or so. We'll get this up. This is another product. Are you seeing that one, Megan? Yes, I'm getting really good at this. Okay, so if you'll notice here, there's at least some cities and highway systems and things like that. So it's a little bit easier to drill down into maybe a landscape that might have been a little bit more difficult just looking at those watersheds with the linked map to the that's linked in the request for proposals. So I'm really hoping that that is useful, keeping in mind that in the actual proposal, and I'm hoping I'm getting there. Now I'm at the proposal. Holy smokes. All right. Keeping in mind that a description is really important to kind of, I'll use the word justify, I guess, that, hey, this is close. This is within those communities. It's within that area that is described in those maps. And is the entire area within, you know, an orange blob? No, maybe not. But these are really high focused areas that we want to treat, and here's why. And you can paint that picture in this project proposal, I think, quite well. And really make a justification for why this matters on the landscape. And then, of course, the final thing I'll say is the map product can also paint that picture of, here it is on the landscape. Here's the 6 or 7 different boundaries that we're working across in a collaborative effort. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish here. So I see another question. What if your project is in a gray class 5-8? Well, great point. And gosh, the legislature did not focus on that, but we've been asked to pay particular attention to the 4 risk classes. That's not to say that only those projects will be funded. I think there's an opportunity here within this description and an attached map and showing the need in box number 5, area description and challenges, and the great work that would be done in proposed activities that can help paint that picture that this is a very important project that makes sense on the landscape. And I would say this, from my humble perspective, if it is one landowner with a rather small project, it probably will not compete very well. But showing a large footprint affecting many acres and a lot of collaboration across boundaries is really going to raise to the top. Okay, I see more questions here. Andrew, let's see. If our land is not in any of these areas on the map, is it worth it to make a grant proposal? Well, potentially not, Andrew. Like I say, I believe that the legislature wanted to prioritize those areas, so those will just naturally rise to the top. Recognizing those areas and what we know about them, there's a lot of different land ownerships. I mean, you look at that and you think of the Forest Service property that's involved there, some of the private in-holdings that are there. That makes for a great proposal. So those will be very competitive. But I believe, and I know that the work group does too, because we've had this conversation, that if there are landscape scale projects that cross multiple boundaries and do volumes of work in a large footprint, we will have to address that. And I think that if you can prove that in painting this picture, then you will be highly ranked. Anonymous. Is there a way we can have access to the shape files of this? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. I plan on getting that particular product from Dr. Dunn and getting that a link to the webpage tomorrow or very soon to help kind of bolster the map products that you'll be able to use. I've been doing a lot of talking, and I really hope that this has been useful. Are there any particular questions or things that we can go over that would be of use? Can work already done count as match? If so, how far back is eligible? That's what I need to check on, Aubrey, and thank you. The answer is yes, but I want to make absolutely certain of when this funding was available, because that's what's going to be important. And so I know that the legislature passed this, and it was, the end of the biennium was, or the end of session, correct me, Derek, I know you remember this distinctly, but it was June 23rd or July 1st or something. The point being, though, that the governor actually signed this on maybe the 16th or 19th, I don't remember. And then when we actually have the funding in place at ODF and it's available, that's when we can go back to those costs. So Derek, maybe you have some more info there.
The bill was signed on July 19th. And it was passed with an emergency clause, so that should make funds available back to July 1st, but that I wouldn't count that as a 100% positive answer. Just know that the bill was signed July 19th with an emergency clause, so it doesn't take 90 days after the legislature adjourns sine die to make that funding available.
Okay, thank you. The RFP notes that partial awards will be considered. Absolutely. How would that work? Well, and here's a case, Ken, of we have $20 million to spend, give or take, because there's other projects that are being considered within this context. So we don't know exactly what it'll shake out to be. But when we rank all these out, and so here's everyone on the review committee agrees that these top 4 projects are, the bee's knees. They need to be, this is what we need right here. So those are funded. But then we'll get to that 5th project or that 6th or 7th where, maybe it comes in as a $3.2 million project. And we're finding that we only have 2.1 available. Then we'll be able to discuss it with that entity and have a little bit of back and forth and say, well, okay, can you utilize 2 million rather than the 3.3 you asked for, or whatever the case may be? And if so, what accomplishments can you count on? What's the different landscape, maybe if you needed to pull back a little bit of that project and utilize this funding? So that's where that would probably work. Can multiple applications be submitted by one applicant? Let me start over, I'm sorry. Can multiple applications be submitted by one applicant under the different grant programs for Senate Bill 762, fuels treatment proposal under landscape resiliency and re-veg proposal under the small forest grant? Great point, and I'm sorry I didn't bring that up. Yes, absolutely. And I think it would be very important and show a lot of collaboration in addressing the large forest and rangeland restoration project that we're talking about tonight, but then really pivoting and describing what maybe a smaller defensible space project in a community might look like that could be funded with small forest land grant program. Or how is this collaborating with, say, state fire marshal defensible space funding, or an OWEB grant that might be directed towards protecting a watershed or something of that nature. And so absolutely, and showing that across the landscape would be a real good model to use. Are there numerical requirements for landscape scale min-max acres and partners min-max number of partners? No, not necessarily. And keep in mind that the whole idea, I guess the legislative intent is to focus on a landscape. I think, though, it would be very hard, I could be proven wrong, to get a proposal in for all $20 million and to focus on 6 counties or larger of a landscape. And so as far as the max goes, I think that, the work group that's going to be looking at this are all professionals in this field, representing various values and entities across the spectrum. It's pretty quickly recognizable if a project can actually be done and if it's lined out and organized in such a way that it can be done. And so, I would keep that in mind as well. What's reasonable, what can be asked for, and what really can be done to prove success, so that, and hopefully if funding is available next biennium, we can pick right up where we left off and continue the great work expanding the landscape. So that's one issue with maybe max. Minimum, yes, we really would struggle with any project that's less than $300,000, because we just can't, we don't have the staff really to have multiple small projects, and that is really what's addressed in the small forest land grant program. So there is an avenue for other funding sources for smaller projects. And as far as minimum acres goes, that really wasn't brought up, but I will say this, that typically our grant programs that we've seen across the landscape, and that's east to west and north to south and different landowners, typically it's about $1,000 per acre of treatment. And so when we're looking at multiple million dollars going towards a project, we would expect a particular acres to match about what that rule of thumb would be. I hope that got to it. Another question: will ODF be allowed to submit projects under this funding mechanism? And if so, will they be prioritized over other projects? ODF can certainly, if it's within the community and the community stands up an ODF contact on a district to provide, just the organization and the administration of putting a project together and getting it to the work group, submitting that, then that would be a great way of doing it. That happens, and ODF is certainly, in some locations available to do that, depending on what team is put together and what cross-boundary project you're looking at. Will that be prioritized? Absolutely not. It's too big for that. None of these single entities really will be looked at in this case, because if, let's say, a single entity submitted a project, that wouldn't even be eligible, or it certainly wouldn't compete well. And so we are really looking to fund multiple entities over a much larger landscape than one particular organization that might put in a project. I would only add there that in that flow chart, when you have disparate parts with individual projects coming together on that landscape, any one of those entities that would stand up and say, I have the time and the space and the knowledge to organize this and submit on behalf of everyone else. That's really the idea. It's not their project. It's the whole community project that we're really looking at. And that's going to be reflected in the proposal. Oh, are these grant funds taxable? If so, what does that look like with multiple landowners under the spearhead of one entity? Great question. I do not know that exactly. There are times when we have used federal dollars on private property in years past, and those are taxable dollars. So that does happen. This is general fund, and I don't know. I'll try to get that. Derek, Megan, perhaps you do, but I'll look into that specifically and get that answer out there. I'll try to send me an email, or better yet, you're anonymous. Maybe you don't want to connect that way. That's cool. I'll get it on the webpage so that everybody can see that.
Yeah, Jeff, I think the best thing to do is once there's a definitive answer for that, we can add that to the Q&A that's on the Landscape Resiliency Program webpage.
Perfect.
So we'll add that and just look there in the next few days and you should be able to find the answer to that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Derek. I'm leaning towards no, but I'll find out for sure. We've got about 15 minutes left, and really comfortable staying with folks and continuing. It's fine with me, but please keep in mind, if you have questions that you think about at 2 o'clock in the morning this morning, and you're just laying there and you can't get this out of your head, don't call me then, but send an email to me and I'll get right back to you as soon as I possibly can. So over the days and that you're kind of collecting information, I'm happy to work with groups and folks to try to get this lined out as best we can. There's some, obviously there's little bits and pieces in here that might be confusing and maybe I didn't word them quite right. So, recognizing that, I really want to be available for folks. Also, when you begin to work with maybe other partners, you'll find that there will be other questions that will be answered through partnerships as well. And we'll continuously update the webpage too. Wanted to mention that. Thank you, Derek. There's another question. Engaging stakeholders in these large scale projects can take a lot of time. Will there be another round of funding next biennium? I really hope so. And it has been a little bit of, it has been difficult to roll this out, waiting for the legislature to process all this and get the language of the bill really out there. The only thing I can kind of rest my hat on, so to speak, is that there are oftentimes shelf-ready projects that the Forest Service has, that ODF has, that conservation districts have, maybe referencing a CWPP for a private landowner or a homeowners association. You can tease out some new ideas, maybe for private landowners. That's an issue. And I think we all recognize that we're kind of under the gun here, and it could take, years sometimes to develop relationships to build out these projects, but we don't have that this time. But I would only end with doing the best that we can, getting a project on the ground that really shows some change in those fuels and providing for safe communities and fire adapted ecosystems each step of the way, a little bit better each time we do this work. We'll be able to tell a story to the legislature, and ODF and others, many others, including our collaboratives and partners, are all working towards telling that story next biennium, and hopefully showing some success and having this go on for a long time. Okay, any last thoughts or questions? I'd be happy to entertain that. But if we're feeling pretty good about where we are, we can call it a night and get to the Xbox. Thank you very much. Please take a look at the webpage, get my contact information. If you don't have it, send me an email or call, and I'll do anything I can to help you out. Thank you, Ian. Appreciate the note.
Okay, so I'm going to add the link to the Landscape Resiliency Program webpage at the end of the chat one last time. So folks can get that right at the end here. Again, we'll have updated information on that site in the next few days. Thanks you, Jeff, for all of the comments and the closing comments. If we have no more questions, then I like Jeff's suggestion of getting to the Xbox, but maybe some dinner for us first. So also just a reminder that a recording of this will also be posted on that webpage. So you others, you can watch, see the questions answered, again, if you want to access that video that will be on that webpage. Right, back to you, Jeff. Take us away.
Okay, thanks again for your time, and call, email, whatever you need. We'll be here for you. Have a good night.